Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. One of the most impactful moments in all of Supernatural comes in the Season 5 finale, when Sam Winchester manages to avert the apocalypse by willingly jumping into a hell portal, taking Lucifer with him. It's such a bittersweet moment. The heroes effectively won, but at the cost of Sam having to spend eternity in one of the worst places imaginable. Luckily, he didn't have to be there forever, as the final shot of the episode shows him miraculously back on Earth. How exactly that happened was one of the core mysteries of Season 6. Initially, Crowley claimed credit, however, near the end of the season, it's revealed that Castiel was Sam's real rescuer. He doesn't really give any details as to how he pulled that off, just that he braved hell to get Sam out. Now, under different circumstances, this could be a good enough explanation. After all, Cass is a powerful angel, and the very first thing he does in the show is grip Dean tight and raise him from perdition. However, this is a little different. Sam wasn't just in hell, he was trapped in Lucifer's cage, a magical prison built by God himself, and locked away in the deepest, darkest depths of damnation. This thing is one of the most inaccessible places in the universe. In fact, just getting it open was secretly the overarching plot of the first 4 seasons of the show. Yet for some reason, the writers thought they could just say, oh yeah, Cass got in off-screen somehow, and that would be good enough. Now to be fair, Cass's mysterious method wasn't perfect. He managed to get Sam's body out, however his soul stayed in the cage until Dean convinced Death to get it back later in the season. This leads to more weird unanswered questions, like why did that happen, and if Cass could get into the cage once, why didn't he do it again, or at least try to get Sam's soul back? For that matter, why didn't Cass offer up this method at any other point in the show when his crew needed to get in or out of the box? The real answer is that the writers didn't think about it that much, and they probably forgot later on, but you're not here for real-world answers. No, you came for in-universe lore answers, so let's see if we can come up with one using the show's own logic. First, let's really examine what Cass himself says about his little excursion. It's not much. All he tells us is that he braved hell. To me, this kind of sounds like he's implied to have just walked right up to the cage and I guess pulled Sam through the bars or something. Despite the wording, I really don't think this is what happened. Not only does it fail to explain how he got Sam out of the box, it also implies that Castiel did something that 2 separate kings of hell could not, that being just getting to the damn thing. One of the things that makes the cage such a bad punishment is that it's so isolated that not even the worst, most powerful demons that sit on hell's throne can come visit. Crowley straight up said that the hellish wasteland of Limbo was the closest anyone could physically get to the cage, and even if you don't want to believe him, there's Azazel, Lucifer's #1 satanic superfan. He was one of the most powerful and loyal demons ever, and even he had to find an alternate way to talk to his devilish papa. Now, if you really wanted, you could say that Cass's loyalty pushed him to fight his way to a place that few have ever reached, but that still doesn't answer how he extracted Biosam. No, I think there are better answers to be found within the lore of the show. With that in mind, let's go over how one would normally access the cage. It's difficult, but not impossible. The main method is to perform a series of rituals that break the magical seals which keep the cage perma-closed. There are roughly 600 seals, each with their own breaking ritual, but you only need to break 66 to open the door. The first one breaks when a righteous man is driven to torture people in hell. We don't get specific criteria for what counts as righteous, but context clues make it seem like it either has to be Dean Winchester himself, or another one of the potential vessels for the Archangel Michael. Once the first one goes, you can start breaking other seals. However, in order to break the last one, you have to do something very specific. In order to finally kick the cage door open, you gotta kill the very first demon, Lilith, in St. Mary's Church in Ilchester, Maryland, and you may or may not have to do it using psychic powers, and you also may or may not have to be Sam Winchester specifically. Since Lilith can only be killed once, without divine intervention, it means that this method can only be used once. Afterwards, the door only stays open for a short time before closing again. We don't really know if this completely resets the seals, or if the cage is left weakened, or what, but whatever the case, it's still strong enough to hold the 2 strongest archangels, as well as keep out the next strongest, as Raphael wasn't able to get in to let out his bros. There are other ways to access the cage, but none of them are particularly easy. Firstly, cosmic beings like God and Death have free access to the box and its inhabitants. God can obviously do whatever he wants, and while we don't know for sure whether Death could open the cage, we do know that he can get in and out with passengers in a minute or 2 with basically no effort. It's pretty safe to assume that the Darkness, aka Amara, could also do that, since she's, God's sister, and also her mere return to creation damaged the cage enough to let Lucifer send out psychic messages. It's a little harder to gauge whether or not the shadow could jailbreak the God Box, but considering it could storm heaven with little difficulty, I'd say it's not outside the realm of possibility. Besides death, we don't know if the other horsemen can just waltz into the cage. However, we do know that all 4 pony boys wear magic rings that can be combined into an unholy fidget spinner capable of opening a portal into the cage seemingly anywhere. This is actually the method Team Free Will used to stuff Lucifer back in the box, along with Sam and Michael and Adam. It wasn't easy to pull off. They had to physically cut the rings off the hands of 3 horsemen, then they kind of lucked out with Death since he willingly loaned out his and gave Dean the instructions on how to activate them. The final confirmed method for cracking the Satan cell comes from the Book of the Damned. The Book of the Damned contains a bunch of forbidden spells, including one that can sort of summon someone from the cage. How it works is a little complicated. You don't actually summon the target physically, but rather you conjure their consciousness into the form of a projection, but they can still use their powers and they can possess people, which does allow them to fully escape. Look, the details really don't matter unless you can find the book, decode its contents, and actually perform the incredibly complicated spells. So those are basically all of the confirmed methods for cracking the cage. Now the question is, could Cass have used one to rescue Sam? Right off the bat, the seals are a no-go since, well, they were already broken and Lilith was quite dead. It's also basically confirmed that Cass didn't get help from a higher power since he had one-on-one time with all 4 primordials and none of their interactions suggested an off-screen collab. The Book of the Damned isn't completely off the table, I guess. However, since Cass never mentions using the book, even after he's assigned to a team trying to crack its secrets, it just doesn't seem likely that he got a hold of it, then lost it, and never felt the need to bring that up. That just leaves the Horsemen's rings, and this is where things get interesting. Not only did Cass know about the rings, there's a good chance he had access to them between seasons 5 and 6. I already mentioned how the Winchesters used them to recapture Lucifer, but what I didn't mention was that Dean kept them afterwards, and he had all 4 for about a year until he returned to Death's mid-season 6. We don't know where he stashed them, however Cass might, since we saw that he would occasionally watch over Dean invisibly at the time. There's also a good chance that he knew how to use them. We didn't see Dean give anyone else the incantation, yet Sam somehow knew it, and also it would just make sense for him to share that info since it was the absolute very last chance to stop the apocalypse. So let's say that Cass saw where Dean hid the rings and, knowing how to open the portal, borrowed them to try and rescue Sam. The question then becomes, could the rings be used to get someone out? This is where things get a little tricky. From what we saw, it seems like the portal automatically slams shut as soon as it sucks someone in, meaning you can't really jump in, grab someone, and then jump out. Still, that doesn't completely invalidate this method. After all, we saw that there was at least one other incantation, one that could close the portal. Who's to say that there weren't others? Maybe one that could open a more stable wormhole. I also like to think it's possible that Cass didn't actually enter the cage, but rather opened the portal and then used some kind of summoning spell to pull Sam's body out. We know that angels have a method to reassemble bodies that have been completely obliterated. Maybe Cass used a variation of that method to yank Sam's meat suit out of the pit. This could also be used to explain why his soul got left behind. Maybe this hypothetical spell or whatever was meant to cast out anything possessing the target, and for some reason, it also affected the host's own spirit. It's a bit of a stretch, but it makes a little bit of sense, right? Use of the rings would also explain why Cass didn't have an answer for how to talk to or trap Lucifer in seasons 11 and 12. His technique for accessing the cage was off the board since Death's ring was gone. There is the lingering question of why he wouldn't open the portal again to try and get the lost soul, but fear not, I have answers. Firstly, there's a risk of restarting the apocalypse. After all, if Sam can get out through the portal, then so can the archangels, and if that happens, then you've not only doomed the world, but also invalidated the sacrifice that Sam willingly made. Cass pulled off a successful sneak rescue once, but I'm pretty sure this would only make subsequent attempts harder, since it's reasonable to assume that once one thing vanishes out of the cage, everyone still inside would be on high alert. That's not the only issue. Even if Cass had a 100% guaranteed way to snag the soul, he didn't have a way to heal it. While downstairs, Sam's soul took unspeakable damage, to the point that reuniting it with his body was considered a fate worse than death. Now, up until the actual rescue, the exact extent of the damage could only be guessed at. However, we know that Cass was aware of the damage, since he's the first person to bring it up. So, that's what I think happened. Cass saw where Dean hid the Horsemen's rings, and later borrowed them to open a hellmouth. Then he either physically dove in and pulled Sam out, or he used a spell to summon his body. I find that to be the most likely answer, but there is one more very remote possibility, and while I don't personally believe it, I wanted to mention it because it's kind of funny. What if instead of using the power of God or the Horsemen of the Apocalypse to enter the pits of hell, Cass teamed up with a leprechaun to get in? Yes, leprechauns are a thing in Supernatural. They're a subspecies of fairy, one that's known to make deals with people and allegedly has access to some pretty impressive magic. We only see one leprechaun in the show, and while he doesn't actually do anything all that impressive, he does specifically tell Sam that he could get his soul out of the cage for the right price. According to him, fairies have access to, quote, real magic, and they know all sorts of back doors in and out of places. Now, it's entirely possible that he was exaggerating, or even just lying. After all, leprechauns are tricky bastards, and even when they deliver on their promises, it often comes with a hidden cost. Look, do I think Cass made a deal with a leprechaun? No, probably not. But could he have? Sure. Maybe he caught one and forced it to help him with the jailbreak. The trickery of the fair folk could also be used to explain Sam's soullessness. Maybe Cass got a leprechaun to open a secret door into the cage, but as a screw you to Cass, Sam's soul couldn't pass through it, and instead was pushed out. As far as to why he wouldn't wrangle another one and demand satisfaction, well, take your pick. Fairies have their own realm that seems kind of hard to access. They don't seem to visit Earth all that much, and when they do, they can make themselves invisible to anyone that hasn't visited their home. We don't see fairies and angels interact, so we don't know how their magic would stack up, but if you believe that a leprechaun could genuinely get in and out of the cage without worrying about the two most powerful archangels, then I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that they could successfully hide from Cass. Mostly I wanted to bring this up because it's extremely funny to picture a scene where Sam is getting brutally tortured, then everyone in the cage freezes and looks on in confusion as a little leprechaun guy does an Irish jig through the bars and grabs Sam and then just flies them both out on a rainbow. But what do you guys think? Do you have a better theory about this mysterious rescue? Let me know in the comments. I'll have more for you next month, but for now, carry on.